Hello, everybody, and it's Wayne Walker, and I decided to do my final project as a 10-minute video, or right around 10 minutes, and I began this whole thing researching Charles Grandison Finney because he stood out to me as someone that I thought that shaped American Christianity as it stands today just as much as he did back then. So I'm going to read and review and discuss with you right now the life of Charles Grandison Finney. Finney, 1792 to 1875, is considered by many as the most influential revivalist of the Second Great Awakening. Others have proclaimed that Finney's work and revivals may even be more important to American Christianity than the early works of Jonathan Edwards during the First Great Awakening. Finney is the son of Sylvester and Rebecca Rice Finney, was born in Warren, Connecticut, and grew up in Oneida County, New York. At a young age, Finney was educated in the common schools, but later attended Warren Academy in Connecticut and also spent some time as a teacher after that. Finney, as a young child, and even into being a young man, has claimed that he never enjoyed what he called religious privileges, uh, meaning that he was never settled long enough in any one place that conducted regular religious meetings. After schooling, Finney traveled to Adams, New York, where he worked as a law clerk. Finney attended a Presbyterian church pastored by what I would consider his mentor, Reverend George W. Gale, and acted as a music director, but he also struggled with his spiritual life. In October of 1821, Finney walked out of the law office, or on his way. The stories vary, but anyhow, he walked into the woods, and with a mission to find God and his spiritual salvation. Upon entering the woods, Finney proclaimed, quote, "I will give my heart to God or never come down from there," end quote. After many hours spent in the woods, Finney returned a changed man. Finney had experienced a dramatic conversion and proclaimed that the Holy Spirit seemed to go through me, body and soul. It seemed to come in liquid waves of love. From that dramatic event, Finney knew of his calling and directed his life in the salvation of others. Finney began to study with his pastor, George W. Gale, and in 1823 was licensed to preach by the St. Lawrence Presbyterian. Later in 1824, Finney was ordained and commissioned by the Female Missionary Society of Western District of New York to serve as an evangelist. This was the beginning of Finney's remarkable career as an itinerant revivalist. It was a general, or I'm sorry, excuse me, it was a great revival in the winter of 1830 to 1831 that brought Finney into the national spotlight. But it was his use of new measures that defined his style of revivalism. His new measures included the HIUS bench, which took over a Methodist practice and converted it. He took over a Methodist practice in the HIUS bench and converted it into a norm for his revivals. The HIUS bench was specifically designed area or seat, usually in the front near Finney, where at the end of the sermons he would ask for those that are lost to come up in front and pray and seek conversion. Finney was also well known for his use of the protracted meeting, which were nightly gatherings for several days or weeks in a revival style setting in the woods or in a city. Finney ministered to thousands and thousands of people throughout his pastoral life and is an itinerant revivalist in New York, Delaware, Ohio, Philadelphia, Boston, and even in England. However, it is the time in between the sermons and the other events in Finney's life that we will discuss in order to learn more about Charles G. Finney. Finney married his first wife, Lydia Andrews, in 1824. The following year, during a journey to Whitestown, New York, to visit his wife's parents, or Lydia's parents, Finney's life and journey took another path. During the journey, Finney and his wife had stopped at the home of Finney's former pastor, George Gale, in the town of Western New York. It was at Gale's home that he asked Finney to preach in the town of Western New York. Finney's preaching and revival skills were found to be dramatic and immediate as crowds came in to hear Finney's sermons and to seek assurance of conversion. Soon after this short success, Finney traveled throughout New York, holding revivals in many New York cities, including Utica and Rome. These revival cities and traveling sermons of instant conversion have been called by historians as the burnt over district, meaning that the areas visited by Finney, and other preachers have been scorched by revivals and spiritual revelations. In 1832, wealthy abolition leaders and Finney supporters Arthur and Louis Tappan had converted the older Chatham Garden Theater in New York City into the Chatham Street Chapel and requested that Finney take position as pastor. Finney accepted the pastoral position, and after a bout with illness and his wife's tiredness of watching over the family on the itinerant trail, Finney settled down in New York. After preaching intermittently at Chatham Street Chapel, Finney went back to the Tappan brothers with a design for a new church located further uptown, and in 1835, the Broadway Tabernacle was completed. At about the same time, Finney was invited to Oberlin College in Ohio to be a professor. At the time, Finney had planned to divide his time between Broadway Tabernacle as pastor and Oberlin College as professor, but the stress and strain of travel took its toll, and Finney settled at Oberlin College, where he served as professor of theology from 1835 to 1875, pastor from 1837 to 1872, and eventually as president of the college from 1851 to 1865. However, Finney did travel back east each year after classes were completed to conduct revival meetings. During his time at Oberlin College, Finney was very successful in involving the institution in the social reforms of the time, such as the temperance movement, the Sabbath keeping, manual labor schools, and abolitionism. Oberlin College even became a station on the Underground Railroad, which was used to help slaves escape to Canada. Although Finney was somewhat responsible or part of such, although Finney was somewhat responsible or part of such movements, he cautioned his peers and fellow pastors not to allow reform efforts to replace revivalism. For Finney, revivals and the conversion of souls was the most important. In 1847, Finney's wife Lydia passed away at Oberlin. Finney was devastated by the loss, at which time he began to seek the wisdom of God in accepting the death of his wife. One day, as Finney prayed intensely, he spoke in his memoirs of hearing the voice of God asking him if Finney had loved his wife for her sake or for his own Finney's sake. Finney explained that God told him that if he loved his wife for her sake, then why should he feel sorrow? For she was with God, and Finney should rejoice in knowing that she was in heaven with God. From that moment on, Finney's sorrow and grief was gone, and he did not look at it again as his wife being dead, but alive in the glories of heaven. Shortly after his first wife's death, Finney married his second wife, Elizabeth Ward Atkins, and just as Lydia, Finney welcomed her into participating in his revivals. During the 1850s, Finney and Elizabeth traveled to England, where Finney preached and Elizabeth held meetings for women, something new and not generally accepted by other Protestant groups, but something that Finney supported and encouraged. During the later years of his life, Finney spent Finney spent his time at Oberlin College teaching theology, serving 15 years as president and writing extensively in opposition to Freemasonry. When Finney was 71, his wife Elizabeth died, and in 1864, he soon married Rebecca Rail. I probably pronounced it wrong, I apologize. An assistant principal at Oberlin's ladies department. From that time, Finney was getting along in his age, and he was encouraged by his friends and companions to write about the revivals that he had conducted over the years. In 1868, Finney began to write about his revivals and lectures. Published after his death as his memoirs or autobiography, Finney's lectures and sermons that were published are still popular today as inspiration and guidance. Charles Grandison Finney passed away at Oberlin in August of 1875 at 82 years of age. Finney served many years as preacher, professor, and president at Oberlin College and influenced many future pastoral leaders. Finney is known by many as the father of modern revivalism. His revivals paved the way for such revivalists as Dwight L. Moody, Billy Sunday, and Billy Graham. Charles Finney had a dramatic impact on early American Christianity, which has passed the test of time, and no doubt his influence will be felt in the centuries ahead. Thank you.